Daniel Ospina, thank you so much for joining us. And you came over all the way from Bogotá, from Colombia. Please say a few words about who you are, what you do, what should we know about you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, Peter. I'm very happy to be here. I do come from Bogotá, Colombia. I've lived there all my life, except for a period in Spain. And what I do is I have a FinTech accelerator. It hasn't always been like this. At the beginning, we were agnostic and we accelerated all kinds of companies within the tech sector and the startup ecosystem in the first stages, which is the pre-seed stage. Before that, I had a micro fund. And before that, I worked at Endeavor. So I've always kind of been in the startup ecosystem, and I've been very passionate for startups myself ever since I was in school trying new projects and ideas. And now I'm sort of more on the investor side with Pygma.
Pygma, where does the word come from? That's also an interesting question.
Yeah, it is. So Pygma is a psychological effect. It comes from the Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect is where high expectations lead to high performance. And that's what we encourage and apply with our community and with our entrepreneurs. We have over 129 companies now in Pygma across Latin America. So we need to be very adamant in making sure they have a global mentality, and we have very high expectations from them in terms of growth, in terms of fundraising. And having that name just keeps a reminder on having high expectations from them.
Yeah, it's not that I'm really into competitiveness. I mean, I am to a certain extent, but how is the scene looking like for accelerators in Latin America? So what should we know about it?
So I would say when we started back there were a couple more. Right now, some of them have shifted towards a more venture capital model. So there's a huge opportunity for us to capitalize on that. There are others that are pretty famous as well, but I would say we are super underinvested as a region, especially in that stage. That's why after I worked at Endeavor, I decided to go into the pre-seed stage with such force because I saw there was a huge amount of incredible founders. They had come from great technical backgrounds. They have great co-founders, but they don't have the capital. And when that is the missing piece of the equation, well, that should be the easy part to solve. Yeah. If you have the talent, which is the scarce asset, the capital shouldn't be the problem. And I thought if we were able to solve this, then the region as a whole would benefit. So there's a lot of space, and we are growing very fast because of that.
Okay. You know, my first kind of impact, that first found me from Latin America was actually Startup Chile many years ago, over a decade ago. And that was the first country I heard about from Latin America doing something related to startup ecosystems. How has it changed since then? How does the landscape look like today? Which countries are leading the game, or which regions, and how is Startup Chile doing?
So that's a great reference you do, and Startup Chile has a very interesting thing as equity free. So they were a huge boom because they give these grants, sort of, which in Europe are a lot more common, giving grants to startups. And Chile was, as you said, a very forward-thinking country with Corfo as well that funded VC funds and Startup Chile funding startups. You got a lot of companies to go to Chile. Mm-hmm. So it's a great initiative. I think many more countries should have this kind of programs.
Is it still going?
Yes, from what I've heard, yes, last time. So it is still going, and it's a huge program. I don't know if Corfo has the same deal as before. I think that has changed because they, in the past, funded VC funds, raised some capital, and they like doubled it or something like that, which allowed funds to multiply their capital. And in terms of the second question of how is the region looking, I believe Brazil is the leader. Then you go to Mexico, and then you have countries like Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Ecuador that are, well, I would say Chile, Argentina, and Colombia may be more similar, and then others that are a bit behind in terms of VC dollars coming into the region, especially after 2021. The amount of foreign capital decreased a lot in the region.
Mm-hmm. And obviously also for geographical reasons, I know from experience talking to many VCs and founders from Latin America that the main goal is to get to the US market. But how do you see Europe? I mean, you speak a language, well, except for Brazil, Spanish, right? That gives a kind of access to Europe through Spain. That's how I think. And of course, for Brazil, it's Portugal. But is it really working or happening? Is there any focus on Europe for Latin American founders, or it's just massively dominated by the US?
So what I've seen more often is European companies that when they are so big, they come to LATAM. Recently, Revolut is opening in Colombia, for example. And hopefully we get founders with a global mindset that aren't afraid of building on a global scale. But I just feel because of language barriers, cultural barriers, founders prefer to expand within the region first. And it's logical. You have 600 million people in Latin America. It's such a huge market that you can get with your startup. Or if you're in Brazil, you have close to 200 million people. So it's just huge markets that you kind of, if you explore, you can build unicorns, decacorns within that same border. But we have great examples from Argentina, cases like Globant, Mercado Libre, OutZero, that have dared to take their companies on a global scale. And I feel that's the new wave of founder, a more connected founder, a more ambitious founder that wants to build on a global scale. So hopefully we have more cases that don't only go to the US, but to the whole global scaling mindset. I think that's what should happen, and great founders usually are like this. But I just feel they gravitate towards starting with the Latin American markets first.
Yeah, I see. And can you give us an example about a company that could go really, big to become a unicorn, only staying in Latin America? Are there any companies you know by heart?
Like Nubank, for example, they have Brazil, Mexico, Colombia. I don't think they are expanding right now to the European markets. Maybe they will. I'm not saying they don't, but that's an example that, for example, Nubank stayed in Brazil for a long time and built a company that was able to do an IPO in the New York Stock Exchange and with a huge customer base within Brazil. So that's a perfect example of how big you could scale if you scale correctly within your market. Because the other thing that happens is if you scale too fast, as these countries are huge countries, millions and millions of people, you can break your runway, you can end up with no money and needing to shut it down because they become like these startups that end up like zombies without cash to fund the operations. So it's hard.
Okay, and with Pygma, I know that you've been into many different verticals, but now you've been for a while focusing purely on fintech. Can you tell me a little bit about the fintech landscape specifically in Latin America? Because I guess you see it very clearly, like how much of the whole cake, it gets as a part, and anything else we should know.
Perfect. So in Pygma, we decided to focus on fintech because we do perceive it as the biggest opportunity right now in Latin America and for the Latino markets.
Why?
And it's, first of all, it's the asset class with more VC dollars, venture capital. It's number one and has been number one for a while now. Fintech as a venture capital investment asset, it's the top one pick. So venture capital funds and all the other investors are pulling the most money towards fintech. Second, you get countries that are starting to regulate policy towards a more friendly fintech adoption landscape. So you get politicians and banks and corporates that are starting to open up to a new market, to a new way of doing things. To, for example, in Brazil, you have PIX, which has had a massive adoption, more like even the biggest and fastest growing startups. PIX was an entity that allowed people to do instant payments. And now the other markets, Mexico, Colombia, and many others are trying to follow this example of a country that has been able to provide its population with instant payment technology. So that's one example, policy changes, venture capital. And the other one, I would say, is the founders that have been outperforming have focused on this industry, on fintech. So you get great founders building on the space. You get great tech people that wants to work in the space, and now with the AI wave coming, there's just a huge amount of opportunities for more companies to emerge with highly specific solutions, cybersecurity solutions that will be a huge amount have a huge amount of importance in the coming years, because with all that's happening and the transformation that's coming, you need to have security, you need to have secure payments, secure transactions, and also the crypto adoption, stablecoin market, Web3 is very fit for our region because we have currencies that move a lot. We have people that don't have access to traditional way of getting a credit card, for example. So they need other technologies to enable them to pay, to enable them to access to credit. And that's what's been happening with stable coins and all this crypto adoption that's coming as well.
And how is mobility, not in the meaning of employees, but more like in the meaning of founders, mobility between Latin American countries? Is it happening? Like, let's say, to tell an example, let's say someone from Mexico believes that Colombia would provide, a better, regulation for what they are working on, so they move to Colombia. Just an example. Is it happening? Is it a thing?
So in Pigma, for example, we have already close to 400 founders. And these founders have something, when you join an accelerator like our programs offer, you have something great that's a community. And when you are a founder that is not that alone, that has a community to get involved in, that has a backup for when they want to travel or go to a new country, that helps a lot for them to move around. When they want to open a new country, they are not alone, so they have people there. That's why we participate in multiple tech weeks, for example. We do a lot of events and try to get our community very mixed up within each other. Not for them to move, because we are telling them, hey, you should go there because it's a big market only. But when they perceive the opportunity, they can go there and know people, know founders, know investors, and that opens a lot of doors. So I guess my answer would be mobility is it's getting a lot easier, and we are seeing these hubs of technology hubs coming. Medellin is becoming one. In Bogotá, you see a lot of founders as well coming. In Brazil, a lot of founders go to Florianopolis, for example, and a lot of tech hubs in Costa Rica.
It's a beautiful name,
Florianopolis, yeah. So you're getting these tech hubs, and founders are starting to move around because nowadays you can run your company in your computer many times.
And is it legally easy, let's say, being Colombian, to move to Mexico or move to Chile for a period of time?
For a period of time, yes, but there are limitations depending on what country you come from. In Mexico, for example, you need, if you're staying more than 6 months, I believe, you need to get special permits. And that's one thing that could improve mobility within the countries. And I guess European Union has light years ahead in terms of that regulation, and hopefully Latin America could become much more.
Is travel visa-free, at least, between the countries?
Yeah, for most countries, yes. But if you want to stay a longer period, you do need some papers.
And you mentioned 400 companies you have in your network, right? Communities, 400 startups, roughly. What's the survival rate so far?
Yeah, so the survival rate up to date, the last study we did, is like 82%. We've been doing this for 4 years. In an asset class like venture capital, you do expect most of the companies to die, and a couple of them to be fund returners. Because in this asset class, what you look for is outliers, and betting on outliers and reaching the outliers is extremely rare. Finding people crazy enough to believe they can change the world with the perseverance to keep on doing it when everybody's shutting doors left and right to them, and to keep pushing the boundaries every day is very rare. And it's very hard to come across one company like this. So in some cases, it becomes a matter of volume. You need to be able to try many times, but not only try many times, but try with a thesis, try with an approach where you understand what type of founder you think might be the next one to build something really big. So I expect many more to end and many more to go down, and that doesn't worry me. I think it's part of what we got into, and when you get into venture capital, you need to understand, and even if you are angel investing, you need to understand that many will die, and a couple of them, if you're lucky, will be huge returners for you.
Yeah. Last question. Is there any way to join for, you know, your brand wagon, your activities from Europe for anyone? Like, do you already have perhaps any kind of relations, investors, partners, whatever, coming from Europe?
Yeah, we are lucky to have a couple of investors from Europe. We have like 3 or 4 right now, LPs. Like when you invest in a fund, you become a limited partner. And we do have like 3 or 4 from Europe right now. Hopefully we can get even more. But what we do at Pygma is we raise one vehicle and get like our investors diversified into 60 startups roughly. So it's a way for them to get exposure into this asset class without having to risk it all into one company, which, as I mentioned, could be very risky. Also, we do a lot of events, and community for us is huge. So we do a lot in Mexico Tech Week, in New York, we do New York Tech Week and Colombia Tech Week. We also do some side events in Uruguay, Punta Tech, or in Guatemala, in Volcano Summit, it's called.
Volcano.
So for people to get involved, it's just as easy as going to these events, starting to meet new people from the community, and well, I'd be happy to meet more people from Europe and connect them, because I think once you go and you realize how alive is that ecosystem, how different it is also to some conceptions that people have if they haven't gone there. Like, I believe some people take away what they see in novels, and it's a very outdated mindset, because you go there and you actually see all of this connection, technology,
I met you in Bogotá at a rooftop networking party of a conference, so exactly. I know how lively it is. I can definitely second that.
Yeah.
Last question, PS kind of question. One single advice you would give to anyone, let's say from Europe, that wants to discover what's going on in the Latin American startup ecosystems, what would be, it could be a cultural or practical, whatever advice you would give?
What would I do is first look for a community that's going for a trip there. There's one I'm part of called 42 Geeks, for example, that I mentioned to you, and they go to these ecosystems. If you don't have access to one community, just pack your bags, contact a couple of founders in the different countries you want to go to, and make your schedule in busy week for like tech week, or a week that has a lot of events. Maybe contact someone like me and tell me, hey, I'm going to these countries and I want to meet with some founders, startups, funds. So just get yourself a connector that can give you some ideas on who to visit and who to connect with, and hopefully you do it in a week that's tech week or some sort of event week, that you can travel around to different countries. And I know it's a long flight. I just did it 2 years. So usually you should stay a couple of weeks and just to get an overall sense and travel some of the countries there.
Well, thank you once again so much for your time and for joining us here.
Thank you,
let's keep on working on connecting Latin America and Europe more than ever.
Absolutely. I think it's very important. Thank you for the invitation, Peter.
Thank you so much.